All right, here's another episode of the Zealous Podcast. This week I've got Mark Fischer from Mark Fischer Fitness. He's the pro behind the pros. And when I say pros, I'm talking about entertainers, performers, actors, and the like on Broadway and off-Broadway. His facility is in New York City, and he's also a fellow Perform Better presenter. So we're going to talk about a whole bunch of things. I hope you enjoy it. So when did Mark Fischer Fitness start? When did you open up the doors?
We opened up about 10 years ago as of Saturday. It was our first in-person class. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And you've got a unique kind of, I won't say twist direction, but you hit a niche that is unique, and that is the people that hate working out or don't like going to the gyms. I mean, what allowed you to strike that direction, that target audience?
I think it was because those kinds of people were my friends, and broadly my social friends were people that were not into fitness and they were not into training. And I found myself absorbing and learning from people that I consider to be titans of strength and conditioning, people that I think are brilliant at what they do, and just learning so much from them, and finding myself present to the fact that most of my friends would not be interested in hearing this information shared the way that I, as a training nerd, was very excited to go to Perform Better and hear them speak on movement and these things that are valuable to me. So I was interested in seeing if I could create a type of business and a brand, if you want to use that word, that would be attractive and magnetic to my friends and the people that I knew intimately that I wanted to serve. And then over time, use that as a venue to express these values of movement and fitness and all the things that are important to me as a fitness professional.
So what is the key successful ingredients of inspiring people who are not really into moving to actually get up and do that?
I think a lot of it is getting them just to push through the discomfort of trying it and getting enough to creating essentially like activation energy, right? Getting them. So in tech world, they talk about user activation. I think fitness is very much the same thing. Part of what I think the biggest boulder to roll up the hill is just to get the person bought enough just to try it, just to push through, first of all, that initial discomfort, and then work out enough times in a row that they start to see and notice changes. And we all know you're not going to see massive fitness or aesthetic changes overnight, but particularly when you're dealing with somebody going from doing virtually nothing to doing something, very quickly, they're going to start to feel a little bit different. As really within even a few weeks, at the very least, their self-esteem, their identity is going to start to change. They're going to be proud of the fact, like, oh, I'm working out. This is so novel and outside my previous identity. So I think there's a lot to be said for that initial sales is maybe not the right word, the initial enrollment of the vision of what their life could be. So we really always pride ourselves on doing our very best to make it as non-intimidating as possible. And quite seriously, a lot of the shenanigans for people listening not very familiar with MFF, you can go to markfisherfitness.com and you will not be able to unsee anything you see there. So take that warning. Not safe for all works.
Yeah.
And
just the homepage itself with the uniform. That costume, it's burning in my memory right now.
Yeah. And so much of marketing, frankly, is just being memorable. Right. Mm-hmm. So, and I don't know that is the easiest thing to reproduce. It was interesting. I was just an hour ago, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine that runs a company called Nomly, and filming an interview with him and Thomas Plummer. And one of the things we were discussing was that I don't know that the most modelable, it's probably not a word, element of Mark Fischer Fitness's success is the overtop, the irreverence, the sheer Looney Tunes of the brand, because it's not authentic for most people. I happen to be a very eccentric person. So for me, I can't help but be a little bit of a provocateur. So many things about MFF, like calling our clients ninjas and having a unicorn as a mascot and cursing like sailors, that is so authentic to who I am. But I'm very clear that often is just to get people's attention in the first place, which is actually different than ultimately getting them to trust you enough to take a chance, which itself is very different than convincing people to sort of make this a lifestyle and have them stick around indefinitely. And I think we're pretty aware that different parts of Mark Fisher Fitness serve different purposes. So for instance, the MFF classes themselves, I've always felt are will probably sometimes feel staged to somebody coming in, maybe with a certain expectation of MFF. I've had dear friends say things such as, I was afraid to go inside because I was afraid they were going to take my pants off and put me in a tutu. And in practice, when you come in, it's just like a good fitness class. And you're seeing somebody's like talking about the position of the rib cage and the movement of the shoulder blade in a push-up. And maybe the trainer is wearing a colorful singlet and they're cursing a lot. And there's a giant, like 8-foot picture of a sloth in the changing room. So the whole thing is colorful and strange. But in fact, if you were to ignore the affectation, it's like meat and potatoes turned to conditioning. It's just we're doing with a population that usually doesn't do that type of fitness. And the trainers don't look or sound the way you might expect from somebody that comes from and what I assume is probably our shared background.
Yeah, now that takes a tremendous amount of gumption, this leap of faith to pull out the things that make you unique and to expose them to anybody that walks through the door. I mean, what was it that you started to see, you know, I think I've got something here with the one-lits and the talking like a drunken sailor? I mean, how did that start coming about?
The whole process was pretty organic in that I was really just training my friends. And I developed a growing following in New York City, mostly in the Broadway community, because I had been an actor. And particularly through 2011, really, I guess towards the end of 2010, when I got intentional, I decided I wanted to stick in town. And I was having a conversation because I was hiring a friend of mine's company, two of my dearest friends from college, who were really interesting, hip photographers. And I hired them to put together some pictures. I just had these images of like what Mark Fisher Fitness would be. And at the time, they were very strange gonzo images. Many would still float around the internet, where I was like, I want to do a picture of me like I'm coaching like an old school strongman, like a carnival barker. And then I want one where I'm like Richard Simmons and there's a bunch of girls wearing jazzercise costumes around me. And then I want to do another one where I'm oiled up in my underwear and I'm doing Brad Pitt in Fight Club, but I'm fighting a Twinkie. Just weird gonzo things because I thought they were funny. And a lot of MFF, a lot of what we've done have started with, well, I think this is funny. And then, of course, you know, this was a very different time. This was really before social media had reached quite the, I think, the tipping point and quite the ubiquity in everyone's lives. But even at that time, having strong visual images, of course, was helpful to develop a brand. But frankly, a lot of the thing that helped most, which is always a little unsatisfying because it's not the easiest to replicate, was I just had a lot of friends in New York because I was an actor and I worked a lot, but I didn't work on Broadway. So I was often working these 6 to 8, maybe 12-week jobs. In between, I was waitering. I was very social at that time in my life. I was out a lot in New York City, having fun and shenanigans. And the Broadway community is large, but it's not infinite. So by the time I decided to go all in on the business, I had a large number of people I just knew personally and socially, and I had developed a reputation as someone that was friendly, that knew what he was talking about when it came to fitness. I had developed a track record already. I was already collecting testimonials and before and after pictures. I had already started an email newsletter that I was putting out 2 to 3 times per week. So as soon as I started modeling the things that I was seeing, and as I was watching that era, particularly of online fitness personality in 2010, I was lucky that I had an audience. And that can be a barrier because I do a lot of coaching. Sometimes the issue in the beginning, which is solvable, is the individual just literally doesn't know that many people. Like even when I have them take out their phone, they only know so many people. But at that time, without exaggeration, not hyperbole, I knew, as in I would say hello to if I saw them, probably 2,000 people that lived in New York City that were decent candidates for what I was offering.
Wait, so you would, I mean, ask clients of yours to take out their cell phone and go through their contacts and shoot out a text to somebody about what they were doing with you?
No. I'm talking about specifically when I'm working and coaching a young fitness professional. One of the very first things I'll have them do is, to the extent that they can, start talking to the people that you know, because the odds are there's many people you already know. And in some cases, people you should definitely be talking to, right? Former clients, current clients, prospects that never wind up working with you, that if we're not communicating with them on some kind of regular basis, it's going to be difficult for them to hire you because there's no opportunity for them to remember you exist. They're not getting any kind of offer. You're not able to build the relationship by giving them content that's valuable. So the first thing I will do with many of those individuals, I will have them compile their database of people that they know. And of course, I was fortunate that when I did this myself, I just happened to know a lot of people. And then to close the circle here and answer the original question, what happened was, as I started teaching group class, which I was very resistant to at first, I was very resistant to because I was like, group class, like put a lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. I do the FMS. And I was like adamant that I only did one-on-one training because anything else was going to defile me and prevent me from providing the level of care that I wanted. And what wound up happening was the first time I started teaching class, I was like, oh, because even though in the beginning, of course, I wasn't good, I'd never done it before, there was this conflagration of my background as a fitness professional, now having spent years as a personal trainer, developing some chops, my background as a professional actor, and somebody that really liked comedy and humor, and then my studies in human psychology and philosophy that allowed me very quickly to sort of fashion for myself an authentic, if heightened, sort of fitness professional, life coach, motivational speaker, stand-up comedian, vulgarity shock artist. And over time, because the people that I worked with were interested in this, they brought their friends, particularly in the Broadway community, which is a raunchy, subversive place of artists and creatives. It sort of took off like wildfire. And I think it was because I was good at the training thing. Right. And also I did a lot of the unsexy stuff well, which is the other stuff that nobody talks about, which is, answer your emails. If the clients, they try to work with you and then you don't get back to them, they might go work with other people, right? And just that basic stuff of just obsessive responsiveness and a desperate desire to please, a very helpful internal desperate need to be liked, which can make for a really wonderful seat of great customer service, but ultimately is something that one needs to negotiate at some point. All of those things taken together, I think, are what led MFF to be what it was. And then I'll just share in closing the other piece of this too, which is a whole other conversation, was frankly just lucking into those first few hires being very, very strong. Because if it had just been me and I didn't luck into hiring, and that's not to take anything away from these individuals so much as to acknowledge I did not know what I was doing. And there was no interview process. It was quite literally like, hey, guy, I met you once in a gym. I'm going to do a gym. Do you want to come do a gym thing with me? Or like, hey, my friend that I do musical theater with, I like to go out drinking with a lot. You know a lot of people and you're fun to be around. Your dad was an RKC. Do you want to come do gym stuff with me? And quite literally, that was the extent of the interview process. It just happened to be, and alongside to this day, my business partner, who had been my best friend since high school, we just got together a core crew of people that were just all in. We loved what we did and had different sets of talents. And that, I think, was when everything really metastasized. Because now it wasn't just me anymore. Now we had capacity. Because I think that's the next stage that can be a challenge if you're looking to grow your business, is if it's built on a very charismatic owner founder, it can at times be hard to sort of wean the clients off of that one individual. And then it becomes difficult to grow the business and have any modicum of bandwidth to work on the business or personal freedom where you can go away and not be the one that everybody's reliant on delivering the sessions. That's not to say that model is wrong. I think it's completely great and awesome way to go. It just wasn't, very quickly, it was not the vision that I had for how I wanted to engage with my business and the community that I was looking to support.
Yeah, and it's really hard when you put your name on the business. I mean,
yeah.
when your name's on the door, that's who people want to see. And whether you want to call it a mistake, a learning lesson, or maybe it was a success, putting your name on the door really does pigeonhole people into seeing you. So what was it? And I asked for my own personal endeavors here, but how did you create that separation for people that wanted to come in and train, but they only wanted to train with Mark Fisher? But you have these incredible trainers here that are very vivacious and very effective. How do you sell them on that?
I think honestly, because they were just really good. We just hired really strong people. And I think we created some pretty decent systems. Now, we spent years fine tuning them. We're still not done. But I think between having some pretty good systems, so the experience was pretty consistent, and hiring people that were reasonably dynamic, I think that helped. I think also we were fortunate, and this is again a little atypical, so it's hard to pull this one off, but we grew big enough that the reality is if you're offering, let's say 30 sessions per week and you're training 20 of them, the clients really notice if you want to go back to 15 or God forbid 10. If you're offering 100 sessions and I go from 15 sessions to 5, nobody really even notices. We'll get some comments in the box, but the reality is it's a percentage of our sessions. I was doing such a small amount that by the time I stopped training full time, it wasn't really noticeable. And I would say that, I was down to probably 10 to 15 hours, certainly by the end of the first year, beginning of the second year. And then I did about 5 hours per week for a few more years until I got totally off the floor. And at this point, the good news is I'm so devoid from that I don't even get a call if somebody has to go in, because I don't really know how to do it. I mean, if I had to, I could pull it off. And a handful of times over the past couple of years, I would do things maybe as a favor if an old-time client was, can you teach this birthday class I want to? But the fact of the matter is I'm demyelinated, to use the most possible pretentious term. I'm just not good at it anymore. I've not been getting the reps regularly. It feels uncomfortable for me. I still have my jokes. I can still hang if need be. I wouldn't say that anyone's necessarily disappointed, but at this point, I'm very aware this is not hyperbole or false modesty to say that my team is literally better at that. They practice it. They do it every week, many of them for years. I haven't done it in a long time. So it has freed me up to be the dancing monkey and brand ambassador for Mark Fisher Fitness, because I do think that there is value in a personal brand in a training gym, because people broadly want to work with a person and not necessarily with a business. And an observation of the fitness industry at large, in ways that are mostly good, I think there was a positive rush to professionalization in the aughts, right? And there was, I assume you might remember this, you've been part of the game. There was a time not that long ago where being a personal trainer was not something anybody was pumped to go home and tell their parents. They did, right?
Right.
The cultural cliche was the pre-contest bodybuilder wearing their, big pants, eating out of the Tupperware while they put Mrs. Rossini through a back by day split. And what happened, I think, again, in positive ways, I think throughout the aughts, the advent of the professionalization of the industry, a lot of organizations, I think the overall quality of training got better in ways that were very good. And you saw, for instance, NASM, which happens to be my certification, even at the time, the marketing materials, everybody was wearing, they were wearing clipboards and they were dressed up sometimes in button downs, or at the very least a collar shirt. And this made sense because we were in some cases rallying as an industry against this maybe fair at times perception that we weren't professional. We were a bunch of like yahoos, reading muscular development, coming and just like crushing Mrs. Rossini. And that was really awesome. And I think sometimes in some cases that can make the business feel a little bit less accessible, particularly for the type of client that I'm interested in working with. So it's an art. You can go too far. I think if there's too much of a personal brand, the business can be reliant in ways that are negative. But we've been fortunate, I think, for the most part, we've been able to have our cake and eat it too, in that I can write all of the emails and have a very ideally personal relationship on emails I put my heart and soul into and develop the relationship and control the marketing piece. But I don't have to do most of the delivery and the fulfillment. Now, will I ever be able to sell it? Probably not. But but I can't complain in the grand scheme. There's as far as my long-term life strategies, I think that's okay. I'm very happy with what the business is. And I have other pies in the oven, so to speak.
Certainly. Now, you created not just a fitness business, but within it, a community. And I think that probably began the moment you started to agree to do group classes. And,
totally.
Up until that point, we were all doing one-on-one training, and it was great to develop relationships, but we weren't developing a community. And so what was that like? You've obviously tapped into not only the theatrical community within New York City, but there are those outliers, for lack of an overused term. Like when was it that you discovered, okay, this is this is actually big. The community is going to be helping to be self-sustaining and help promote exactly what we're doing.
I think certainly the first time I taught that class, there was an element of that. And that wasn't community built. I wouldn't say community is built when we talk about the things that we care about to people that actually care, to people that are like deeply listening, right? And that is a thing that in most training gyms is going to happen before and after the session anyway. So the first class, I didn't have that piece. What I did have, and this is, I think, an underappreciated element of any group training, is communitas, is this sense of group flow activity where we're all doing this thing together. Now, frankly, as a fitness professional, that's not without peril. That's not without peril, because if you're in a group class, you have individuals on the one hand, yes, they can draft off the energy of the people around them. But on the other hand, they can be at times unconscious about what's going on with their movement and pushing into positionings that maybe we're not the most excited about seeing them in from an orthopedic perspective. Mm-hmm. So that it's not without peril, but that is a meaningful thing. And that's part of, I think, why I don't actually see team training going away outside, say what you will about COVID, but I think that, and it's not for everybody, it's not what everybody wants, but a lot of people value that because also, frankly, in some ways, it's easier. It's easier than coming in and doing a workout where you are your own center. And even the small group training model, which I love, and from a fitness perspective is probably my favorite, and we also run an MFF, it doesn't have that thing. So the Communitas experience, I noticed the first time, I was like, okay, there is this thing going on here where the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of its parts here. I think once we had a physical clubhouse, we did everything we could to push that community. And part of what made it easy at that time, Frank, was we were in different places in our lives. So as it happened, we were all relatively young and single. So we just wanted to hang out all the time with each other, wanted to hang out with the clients all the time. Some real pros and some real cons. We got away with it. And we also had a physical space where people could hang out. I mean, we did things in retrospect that are hilarious. Like when we would do our workshop before our Snatch in 6 Weeks program, we called it the foreplay workshop. And then we'd have a party called Meet the Meat. Meet the Meat. Hey, ninjas, come meet the new meat. Come make out with the people before they go strict on their diets. And I would, go buy a bunch of booze from across the street at the liquor store, like, everybody, let's do a pantsless twister. And it was an incredible amount of fun. And it was a really glorious time that is very present, I think, in all of our memories, but in practice was literally only 6 months. And then it all went away. And then everyone was like, I can't do this anymore. And I will say, I have to give credit to the rest of the industry, right? I think another thing that I think is not always apparent for what people look at MFF is I don't think I'm particularly creative. Like, I don't think I'm particularly like a visionary kind of person. I think the MFF's brand is unusual, but for the most part, I have learned by studying what's working other places, trying things out and keeping what's worked. At that time, if one remembers 10 years ago, was right around the heyday of CrossFit's like peak, right? Where CrossFit at that time was exploding. Now, it wasn't a fitness methodology that was in line with my personal philosophies and principles, but it was very clear that, okay, there's these people are into it, and they're not just into the thing, they're into each other. And again, I feel lucky because by the time we opened up the facility, I already had a model for what that looked like. And I did my best to just implement, and create all these opportunities to create connection. And that's been interesting over the years too, quite frankly, because as you might imagine, our community has aged some, but certainly I think the median age of the team has changed. And the way you find community as a single 31-year-old is very different than, a bunch of married middle-aged people with homes and many with kids. And that's been sort of interesting to navigate that. It's not been without its challenges, but it's also been kind of fulfilling and satisfying to be like, oh, now instead of having a party with open bar, we do pantsless twister and blare the music at the clubhouse. We all go out to a cabaret together and have a glass of wine, and we go to like a fundraiser and go see some people sing together. And that, I think, maturing of the MFF community has been in its own way actually very satisfying and interesting to sort of continue to rediscover what does it mean for us to be a community engaged now as we're getting older and we're changing and we're different. The things we're interested in are different than they were 10 years ago.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Yeah. And also agree with CrossFit really establishing the sense of community within their boxes. I mean, it actually started right around the corner from where I am right now, and
Okay.
Greg had just a remarkable concept that organically grew, and and it is what it is today. But um, through better or worse, it's changed millions of lives, and most of them for the better. So, and created that sense of community, which is, I think, what our fitness industry was missing up until that time. It was exclusive to the bodybuilders or the power lifters, but the average gym goer, they were casual acquaintances, maybe on the treadmill or at the bench or whatnot. There wasn't that cohesive sense of community. Now, you mentioned Perform Better, of which we both are presenting for. I'm curious, how did that happen for you? And when did you discover the Perform Better's training summits, and what's the story there?
Yeah, it was relatively early. I always say, particularly now, because I both travel a fair amount and I do a lot of speaking, and I pride myself on really looking through the entire industry, because the fitness industry is absolutely enormous. So in addition to running MFF, a lot of my time, probably almost most of my time, is spent speaking and coaching and consulting and working on the business of fitness. And I always say that the corner of the industry I came from is what I often refer to as the performbetterstrengthcoach.com T Nation corner. And how I found it quite literally was my first day of New York Sports Club, working the floor. Young Mark Fisher Fitness, at that point, really my fitness education for the most part just been devouring flex and muscle and fitness and reps and Ironman. I mean, I read even the weird ones. I read them all, right? But to my credit, I knew that I didn't quite knew what I was doing, and I was a little nervous going into this. And now I was, starting to study for NASM, and a client on the floor of New York Sports Club was like, "Hey, you might like this website I check out. It's called, you ever heard T Nation?" I was like, "No." And this was an interesting moment for T Nation or Testosterone or T-Mag, and it's had a number of names over the years, because this would have been 2007 maybe. So this was a really golden moment, because you still had Boyle and Ian King and Charles Poliquin, and a lot of the old guard were still writing. You had Berardi, Ferrugia, Chad Waterbury, a certain crew is now being established at the Young Guns, and you just had the Eric Cressys, the Mike Robertson, and they were like babies at this point. They were like 23-year-olds writing. So when I found that website, that opened me up to the world of functional training, which was relatively new. And T Nation was the perfect entryway drug, because it was a little bit bro, it was a little bit bodybuilding-ish, but it was introducing me to a lot of people and really expanded my perspectives about how I would look at movement, how I would look at program, how I'd look at exercise selection. And then I think through there, I started following everybody that wrote for T Nation. I started following all of their websites and their blogs. And I suspect that's how I got myself hooked up with the Perform Better crew, because it was a relatively short period of time. I think it was in maybe 2 years I started going to the summits. And then that became, and really to this day, probably the pinnacle of my yearly education calendar.
Yeah, I would agree. We shut our entire studio down, head down to Long Beach, and come back a better team because of it. So it's been great. What was your, this fall, we had the meetings of the minds. What was your topic?
I spoke on fitness business. So that tends to be my shtick when I speak at Perform Better. I have done, interesting enough, for the business guy, I actually have done some of the hands-ons for them, in part because I know that that is like helpful to have. It's one less speaker. If the business person can do a hands-on, I know it's helpful for Chris. And the reality is, again, I'm still a nerd. I still love that stuff. As I said, I think I'm reaching the point where I no longer feel it's honest of me to be doing that. But most of the time I would do some talk on usually fitness business, behavior change, coaching conversations, and then I would do a hands-on. And a lot of my focus on the hands-on was breaking down how MFF teaches movement, because we use a lot of over-the-top metaphors and a lot of things that I have learned over the years by studying essentially pedagogy and adult learning and understanding how do you make things sticky. So a lot of my work with that has been breaking down how MFF programs, intelligent general pop, broad fat loss training, and then how you teach newbies to move well faster, which is something that's very important, particularly in a place like MFF, where many of our clientele have had no movement experience and have varying levels of kinesthetic awareness. So they can be at times a little bit challenging to get them to move in ways that are in the ballpark of what we would like to see, right? Which is not to say that there's one correct way to move, or that we are absolutists, but there are certain, we can all agree, certain positions sometimes when you see someone in that we think is maybe not ideal. And I think that's so much of the art, particularly when you're a young coach too, is understanding how much of this am I going to allow? I can't fix this all on the first day. So where do I intervene? Where is harm actually going to be done? And how do I meticulously develop a system and a philosophy that allows me to sequentially move through the big rocks of their movement and not spend, a lot of time in that first session, like, oh, your right big toe keeps popping, which, well-intentioned, but maybe not, maybe they might not have the bandwidth for that. They've never moved before ever. Which, by the way, I've done. So I'm only joking about it because I absolutely was that guy. So let's be clear.
Yeah. It's interesting, the evolution of the approaches we take as trainers, coaches, or however you'd like to term it, and what we find working and what we just push off to the side because we realize that didn't get us the results we want. I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about COVID, because we all obviously had to pivot innumerable times, more than the New York Knicks on the court. So what were your biggest challenges, aside from the obvious with shutdowns, but what were the things that were the hidden gems, as well as the big detours or blocks that you came across?
Yeah, so many things. So I think that the biggest challenge, of course, was just trying to run any business in such a certain environment where the facts are changing weekly and you have to be flexible. And ideally, we all want to be flexible and resilient, but it's not without a certain emotional cost. And particularly when things went down in March and in April, New York was not an easy place to be. It was very difficult, particularly that moment. There was so much uncertainty about how bad this was going to get. Not to say that it's not been bad, but those were some very, very dark moments that forgive me, trigger warning here, but brought to mind, like being in my senior year of college when the first few planes went down and you were like, you didn't know what was going on. You didn't know how many other planes are out there. Like, is this World War III? What's going on here? So similar to that, I think at the beginning when there was lots of uncertainty, ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, I have to say MFF was very lucky, because the thing that wound up being incredible for us, and we'll see, it might still be the main thing we do going forward, which is kind of shocking to me, is we pivoted online and we did online classes called Homebody. It's still far and away our most popular service we offer. We continue to sell new memberships every single week, which surprises me, because if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have thought surely as we approach 2022, that service is going to peter off completely. Now, the in-person business has not ramped up as quickly as we would have liked, which is a little bit to be expected, because I think New York market is, for the reasons I explained, my sense is very understandably skittish about going back in, no matter what is going on. And that makes sense. And I, as a rule of thumb, do my best to just be empathetic and compassionate to all the many different experiences going on, the challenges many people are having. So the other benefit I will say of this is it did give us essentially a once in a lifetime opportunity to remake parts of the business. And one of those things, for instance, from a service perspective, is we moved away from the 3-on-1 semi-private model with individualized programming, which has its advantages. We did it for many years. It wasn't not working, to the 6-on-1, still individualized, but now built off a master template. So instead of 3 people doing completely independent programs, now when people come in, there's a master program on a 4-week phase. And then based on someone's goals, based on someone's movement needs, they might have different exercise selections. They might have different rep ranges, but overall, it's allowed us to create a slightly more cohesive environment and deal with more people. And that is been a pretty substantial change to the business model
How's
because
that worked out?
different product. It's
And
mostly worked out great. The ninjas that were very attached to the old style, some of them, as predicted, just are not on board with the new thing. They don't like it. They like the old world. And that's to some extent our fault, right? So as much as I would love to shake my fist at the sky and say that, you know, when we're in a conversation where what you're telling me is you think your perspective about fitness is correct and that I'm incorrect with my perspective about what is going to serve your fitness best, is challenging because you only think that because I told you that, but I no longer believe that to be true. And what you're saying is the old me was correct. Now, admittedly, there is a separate I think arena of debate is very fair, just like what people want. Just some people want a different experience. And, you know, if you want to come in and you want to do 8 sets of 3 on the trap bar deadlift, that really wasn't working so great in the old model. And it's definitely not going to work in this new model because now we do need to move you through a little bit quicker. And candidly, it's not a perfect fit for the small percentage of rarefied air of clientele that do need a lot more specific advanced stuff. So that was the decision we made as a business. We can help more people by just getting clearer about this. And I will say that overall, you know, I would give the rollout on our end probably a B. I think we should have been communicating more about what was going on, but to our defense, we were just reopening the physical facility. Classes were coming back. I mean, there was so much going on that I'm not beating myself up at all about that. I think we could have prevented some of them from some gnashing of teeth and angst and suffering. And now that we're on the other side of it, I feel great about it. I think it's ultimately, for most people, most of the time, a better service at a better price point. It's better for the business. It's better for the trainers. It's a more scalable model. And, you know, nobody that has signed up since we've done it has terminated because they really preferred to have their own individualized program and do, you know, 10 sets of 2. So going forward, I think we're going to be okay here, but there definitely was a little bit of an adjustment that we kind of knew was going to be the case. And I think that's the constant challenge in all the businesses. You're constantly, you can't do it willy-nilly. You need to understand, I think there's a cost anytime you make a change. And I think that's part of the role of the leader and the owner is when you know what the better path is, keeping in mind, you don't want to give everybody constant whiplash and make everybody nauseous because you're flailing about at the steer. And you do have to be willing to make some difficult changes when you decide something's better. And after a lot of study and a lot of research and a lot of discussion with a lot of my colleagues from across this industry, it just became apparent to me that was more in line with what I thought was going to best serve our community. And now we're on the other side, and now it's better. Now it's better.
It's good. But then there was your own professional development where you were having this avenue of going out and being the educator, the presenter, offering courses, workshops, all that. I mean, I was on track with that as well. And then suddenly COVID hits and now there's no more travel. So
Yeah.
are things, for me, they just opened up last week or so, went to Vegas for a conference. I've got another one coming up in Oregon. I imagine things have opened up for you now where are you starting to travel? Are the doors opening up or what?
Yeah, I think they are. I think that, so I have a coaching group through my company, Business for Unicorns. So we had our first in-person event again, late September. Then in October, I went to do an event in London. And then I attended an event in Vegas 3 weeks ago, and then had another Unicorn Side event in Nashville. So it does feel like it's back a little bit. I am going to attempt to probably, if I can, do a little bit less. I'm attempting to do, we'll see, famous last words, or do a little bit less travel as a speaker this year because I want to create more space and time to attend events and be a part of groups as an attendee, as I've realized that I haven't had as much time for that because I've been, which is amazing. I'm so grateful for it. I'm not complaining, but I've been so busy traveling as a speaker. One can only be out of their business for so long, even though like I said, I mostly can run MFF remote at this point. It's still not an efficient way of getting work done because when you do a 2-day weekend event, you're going to lose Friday, you're going to lose Monday. The whole week, you're not going to be quite as productive because you're getting readjusted when you get back home. It takes a toll. I try as I might have gotten better at this, but I do know there's no doubt about it. It's when I'm not eating my own food that I'm cooking, if I'm not training in the gym that I go to here, if I'm not in my schedule routine, I'm a pretty regimented person. I'm only going to get so great of a lift in the hotel room gym, or even if I go find another place while I'm there, I'm going to be at the conference from probably 8 to 8, I'm going to be hanging out afterwards. So that's kind of what I've been negotiating from that front. So to answer your question, yes, it's starting to pick back up. And my hope is I will find a little bit more moderation this year. And I'm not willing to bet that I will do that very well, because I love it. I just love learning. I love traveling. I feel very grateful that I get to do that as part of my work.
Now you've got the Optima conferences for NASM, which you mentioned, that's your organization you went certified through. We've talked about Perform Better. What other, this will be my last question really, as a presenter, as a notable presenter, what are the conferences that you're seeking out to become a student in?
So first of all, I have not been to the Optima conference. So that would be high on my list for sure. I think that I'm looking to attend a lot of same but different events. So for instance, I have not spent much time at the club industry world or the URSA or the larger umbrella bodies of the industry. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for me to learn there. Now, doing what I do, the training gym that I run is a very specific model. And there are very specific, I think, best practices and to some extent constraints of that kind of business that, of course, are not always going to pair perfectly with the types of strategies that you can employ if you have 100,000 square foot facilities in South America. And I'm very aware at this point, a lot of my continued learning is a lot of that same but different. I've also been studying very aggressively the franchise models, particularly franchise group fitness, because there's a lot of things that they do in their businesses that make a lot of sense. So additionally, remains to be seen exactly what I pulled the trigger on. I'm looking at a couple of coaching groups for next year that I plan to join, because I'm actually looking at a number of opportunities to invest in some franchise models. So in addition to running MFF and running Business for Unicorns, I have a partner that I'm working with that would be an operator and a boots on the ground. And then I would be participating in the equity funding and then would function as an advisor. And I'd be giving some time to it. I wouldn't be totally hands off. But at this point, I'm very interested in those types of business because I think a couple of the particular holes that I have right now as an entrepreneur, a few things I think I don't do well yet, I think I could learn there as well. And based on the way that goes, I don't need my biggest business to be the one named after me. I have no plans to close Mark Fisher Fitness. I'd like to keep growing Mark Fisher Fitness. And at this point in my life, I am interested in sort of other relationships with businesses and going towards, a little bit less of the operator piece and a little bit more of the investor piece. So a little bit early innings for all of that, but it's something that has given me a lot of energy. And if that happens, then part of what I'm most interested in is it will open up just a whole new type of conference, a whole new type of individual. I've just been so satisfied and enriched and nourished by learning about that type of business, which is an independent owner operator. Sometimes is poo-pooed, right? In a lot of circles, like, oh, the chains, they don't have what we have. And I don't know that's necessarily wrong. I think there are, there's pros and cons to anything you might do. But, to my mind, I'm very interested in really looking at businesses and people that are clearly functioning at a level that's not necessarily higher, but certainly bigger than mine, and challenging to push myself to be in situations where I don't know what everyone's going to say. And I know that's a little bit of a challenge is when you do a lot of the same route with, no disrespect to the routes that I do, but most of these speakers are my friends. Most of them, I've been watching everything they've said for 10 years or more. So it's not always going to be new stuff. And sometimes I will hear the speaker will say the thing in a different way, or I'll do the thing that I think all of us, old hats do, where you're like, oh, why did I stop doing that thing? That was such a good thing. Why was I stop doing that? And that certainly has its value. But, a lot of things I'm looking for right now probably relate to that. And to answer very specifically, there is a coaching group specifically around franchises I think I might join if I go that route. And then I'm looking into, are you familiar with Dan Sullivan by chance?
No, I'm not.
Dan Sullivan is known to be, many would say he was the original executive coach. He was the original, he's sort of the godfather, if you will, of like the mastermind world. And he has a coaching program called Strategic Coach, which is not specific to the fitness industry. And I've heard really great things over the years. A number of my mentors have participated in that from a number of different industries. So at some point, I know I'm going to do that one too. So those are the ones that I'm looking at right now, but it's a little bit dependent on what happens with how far these other investments get and what's going to be most valuable for me and the various businesses and clients and communities that I'm going to be looking to serve in the year ahead.
Well, you definitely don't have an empty schedule. I'll give you that.
No,
nice.
No, definitely. Yeah. It's maybe bite off more than I could chew. We'll see. I'll come back in a year and I'm like, Rocky, I made a terrible mistake. I did too many things.
Well, that would be good to hear. I wouldn't mind that. I'm sure our path, not that you've bitten off too many things, just to hear your feedback as to your pursuits and what worked and what didn't. But I'm hoping that our paths cross somewhere in the near future at one conference or another. But Mark, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you sharing a little bit of insight, and I always give this time at the end for contact information. MarkFisherFitness.com, is that correct? That's your website?
Yeah.
And then what's your Instagram handle if people want to follow you?
Yeah, they can find me on Instagram at MarkFisherHumanBeing, one word. They will note I strangely don't do much in the way of social media. So I am available for direct messages and the occasional story and feed post. I think the place where people can best keep up with me is certainly MarkFisherFitness.com. If somebody is interested, if they're in the industry and interested in what we're doing, or if you're just like fitness and you want to get some fitness information, they can go and sign up for our newsletter there. And then businessforunicorns.com. I write a weekly newsletter and then we podcast about once a week. And that's specifically on the business of running a training gym. So people that are interested in that should go to that website and they'll find places to sign up for content there.
Excellent. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate your time, and I wish you well as doors of opportunity continue to open up.
Thanks so much.
And that's another episode for the Zealous Podcast. I want to thank Mark Fisher from Mark Fisher Fitness coming on and just sharing his experience of what life in New York City in the fitness world is all about. Tune in next week when we go back into the world of professional sports, talk with one of the coaches there. In the meantime, be sure to tell people about Zealous, subscribe, and we'll see you next week.